everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Precision Rifle Media. This week, we got Ray Gross coming on to talk about Manson Precision Reamers. Ray's a competitive shooter, and he's been working for Manson for quite a while. He's going to have a lot of interesting stuff to say. We're going to go over a lot of cool stuff, and I'm really excited to have him on. But I'm going to let Ray come on and introduce himself, a little bit about who he is and what he's got going on. So, with that, Ray, are you? Oh,
I'm
there you
here.
are. Sorry.
I'm here.
Yeah, so Ray, with you, you want to introduce yourself, a little bit about who you are, what you got going on at at Manson, maybe a little bit of the background of Manson, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so I started working at Manson Tools back in 2018, um, uh, and got to work with Dave for 3 or 4 years before he sold it just this past April, I think. And so I had a good immersion, I guess you might say, in um, uh, the Reamer business. A lot of I got to benefit from a lot of Dave's knowledge that he accumulated over something like 40 years or so of being in the machining and then in the Reamer business. And so I count myself pretty lucky for that. Before I even started working there, I had bought Reamers from Dave on occasion. Um, I had gone down and met with him a few times when I had technical questions about headspace gauges. I was captain of the U.S. team for a few years, and part of that was making sure we were in compliance. So when we got to another country, and they were doing the compliance checks and stuff, I wanted to make sure we were in compliance before we got there. So having Dave as like kind of a technical expert and being able to explain things
Can you
was
explain what being in
huge.
compliance means?
Well, I'm sure, just like in all shooting sports, there are rules regarding rifles. In this particular case, it was for FTR. I was captain of the FTR team for the 2017 World Championships, which was held in Ottawa, Canada. And the big question, kind of maybe contentious even, was they were going to do like headspace checks and chamber checking and stuff to make sure that people were not using an oversized chamber, an oversized cartridge, which might give them an undue advantage. And what the some of that contention was included was there. Everybody looks at the specs and they look at the nominal number and they think that's what it is, and nobody takes into account that there's tolerances. And so when you start taking that into account on 3 or 4 different continents, and then everybody shows up after training for 4 years and making a good faith effort, and you're going to tell them that they're out of spec because they're a few tenths over, a few tenths under, that it was kind of an issue that I was worried about. As it turned out, it wasn't a big issue, but those are the kind of things you have to be prepared for.
Yeah, you don't want to get out there and all of a sudden be told you can't shoot.
Right. Exactly.
All right, so sorry. Continue with.
So anyway, so Dave, a little background. Dave started out working at Climber Reamer.
Yep.
And he worked for Max Climber, who was, I assume he was the original owner, I'm not sure how many years, but quite a number of years. And he was like the plant manager there, doing, running, basically making the reamers, making the gauges, running the show there for quite a number of years. Climber eventually sold. At the time, it's been sold once or twice since then. So, but at the time, it was first sold. Apparently, the guys who bought it kind of stepped on it a little bit with some of the bigger customers. And one of the bigger customers approached Dave and said, "Hey, why don't you just start your own business and we'll buy reamers from you?" And so Dave went out. One of the guys from down there went with him, Rick, who is still with us. He's kind of part-time now, Rick Pelletier. And they they opened a shop and slowly built it up into what it is today.
Sure. What
And
is
that
it
was
today?
about 20 years ago. So I don't know, about 98-ish, 97, 98, 99, somewhere in
Okay.
there.
Sure. So what
Yeah.
is it today? I mean, let's
Well,
hear it.
right now,
Talk yourself up.
yeah. So right now there's 9 or 10 of us working. We were bought by a couple of brothers who are also in the Flint area. So we're in Grand Blanc, which is a little, you might consider it like a suburb of Flint, Michigan. And there was a couple of brothers who are part of a family of I don't know, machine shops. But anyway, they're in the aerospace business. So they make like fuel injector nozzles and all kinds of stuff like that in their shop. And they were making parts for us as well. And Dave had been trying to sell it off and on for a number of years, and he finally kind of caught the ear of the two brothers, and they worked out a deal. And so last April, the sale went through. So now what we have is we've got this kind of much bigger, much bigger, much deeper manufacturing knowledge base behind us, and the ability to kind of lean on that, and hopefully over time we're gonna we'll be able to make certain things even better than we do now.
Awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
where maybe they're, onesie twosies, and now you're getting some guys involved that are used to maybe some larger scale stuff. That's kind of what's going on.
Well, no, I wouldn't say that. I would say that one of the big things for me, one of the big things was that we have access to an actual real inspection room now. So one of the things I do at Manson is I work on headspace gauges mostly. I don't do a lot with the reamers. I do some of the grinding on some of the reamers, but
The
I'm
really,
no,
really important ones, the real
yeah,
special
yeah, no,
ones.
um, no, not really. Although I'd like to learn, I think that'd be an awesome to be able to say, this I made this reamer, and I won this with the reamer I made, right?
Yeah. Right.
But the gauges, while they're, of course, I don't have a machining background or a grinding background or anything like that. I have a long and fairly deep knowledge of the shooting industry, and I've got a lot of contacts out there just from my time as a competitive shooter. And so that was valuable to Dave in this fact that he could bring me in, and I already understood what somebody, if you were to call me up, I instinctively know what you're talking about,
Hmm.
in a way that somebody who is not a shooter, or not, certainly not, maybe not a hardcore shooter wouldn't, right?
Yeah.
So so gauges, back to the gauges, they are the simplest thing we do, right? The simplest um, product we make. It's a solid piece. It's a
Yep.
it's a solid little hunk of metal with a
Yep.
shoulder on it. But they're also the lowest, the smallest tolerance item we make. Right? They have to be made to a real tighter tolerance.
Yeah. Very precise.
And so having access to more precision measuring equipment is a real plus when it comes to that.
Sure.
Yeah.
How do they measure those?
What we do is we have a several stage process. So they're getting measured as we're making them.
Hmm.
Um, what we'll do is we have a set of master datums. So a datum, what we would call a datum block. Now they're not really square. Block sounds square, but they're a little round carbide thing that's ground. It has a hole honed to a very high precision diameter. So for instance, our carbide 400 datum, right? It has a hole in it that's 400. Now the reason it's important is that it's carbide in this particular case is that the shoulder on that datum where the gauge, I don't have one here to show you, but as you can imagine, putting a hardened gauge into a datum block, thousands of them, per month, it wears down the shoulder. With the carbide, it doesn't wear down very fast. And we only use like our master carbide datum blocks to make a master gauge. So with that master gauge, then, while we're out in the shop making things, we have working datums, and everything is compared to that master gauge. So the master gauge, a lot of time is put into it. Very careful about temperature. You could hold a gauge in your hand and it's going to change a couple tenths in length in just a few minutes, right? So a lot of time and effort is put into making the masters as close to absolute zero, absolute minimum SAMI spec as possible. And once we have those, then we can make, literally one of those will last for a couple of years before it's probably time to start making another one. They'll wear a little bit, but they're a little harder than the working datum blocks. So it's the working datum block that wears. Once you have the master gauge, it doesn't really matter. I could, let's say a 308 has a 400 datum. I could make 308 gauges with a 350 datum or a 450 datum. It doesn't matter because my master is my master. It's the shoulder angle is correct, and we're it's a trigonometry thing. As long as it compares properly, and as long as the the gauges we're making are within spec in terms of angle and so on, they're going to measure correctly regardless of the datum, within reason. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
So when we get it, we make all of our own blanks for the reamers, for the gauges, for a variety of other things that we make. And they get made, the gauges are made out of 01, then they're sent out for heat treating. The reamers are made out of high-speed steel, and they're sent out for heat treating. And then when they come back, those blanks, the gauge blanks, reamer blanks, whatever, are then finished ground into the working item that you would purchase.
Sure. Yeah. So a lot of measuring, a lot of precision, and a lot of measuring goes into making a nice precision tool that's going out that is going to be right. Yeah.
Yep.
That attention to detail is what makes.
Yes.
Everything's, all the little things, all the little numbers.
Yep.
All stacks up to make something real nice.
Yep.
So, let's talk a little bit about the reamers and maybe like what makes a good reamer. What if you were going to get a reamer, what are you looking for in a reamer?
Well, ultimately, what you want is a reamer that's ground. So all of the teeth, or all of, not the flutes. The flutes are the cutout, but each one of the cutting edges is the same height, so they're all going to cut evenly. You want close. You want it held close to your tolerance so that you're not cutting an oversized chamber. You want concentricity between, throat, neck, shoulder, body, so that when you are, if for example, if this cutting edge was prominent or taller than all the other ones, even though it might measure right, because maybe this one's shorter than all the other ones on the opposite side, it's going to cut a way oversized chamber because it's just not correct, right? The other thing you're looking at the rake. I know you probably can't see this, but the face of that flute is very close to 90 degrees to the cut. It can be a little positive or a little negative, but it can't be very far off. If you get too far off, it's either going to dig in, or it's just going to mash, and be really hard to drive in as you're trying to chamber your barrel.
Yeah, so I think it's Gordy Gritters or Fred Ziglin. I can't remember in his book, but he talks about how there's always going to be one flute that cuts harder than another flute.
It's possible, and that's probably true with a new reamer. It's probably true.
within
Um,
reason?
yeah, with a new reamer coming off of the CNC machines, they're probably closer to dimensionally perfect. Okay, so um, um, the height of each cutting edge will be very, very close to the others. There might be a few tenths difference, but you're never going to see that when you're using it. For, let's say you had a Wildcat, we would make that on a manual machine, because we can't tie up a CNC machine to make one thing
Right.
unless you really want to pay a lot of money for it, right?
Yeah. Or you want a whole lot of them.
Or, well, right. If you were going in business and you wanted 20 of them, yeah, we'll make them on a CNC all day long for you. Now the manual machine, the wheel is not quite as hard, right? So it wears as you as you um, as you grind that edge. Let's see, I'll get it up here where you can see it. As you grind this one and you index it, and you go to this one, you grind that one. By the time you get around to the sixth one, your wheel's worn a little bit, and so that last one might be as much as half a thou bigger than the first one you did. Now that might sound terrible, right? But in effect, once you use it, that would be an extreme.
Extreme.
But
Yeah.
once you use it once or twice, that high edge wears down a little bit. All the flutes will cut. Sometimes, believe it or not, perfection is your enemy with a reamer. If everything, well, there are reamers that, for no reason, will chatter. No reason that we can dimensionally detect. And it's really a harmonics thing. You've got 6 flutes. They're probably 2, 3, sometimes 4 inches long each. So you got 24 inches of cutting length, all trying to cut forward all at the same time. And you get a little bit of weird harmonics going, and it causes, it's one of the causes of chatter. And the easiest fix is you send it back in, and we set one of the teeth back a little bit, and that takes care of it. And it doesn't take much.
Crazy.
Yeah,
That's weird how that.
Yeah. Now other times, of course, it does happen. There could be an issue. There might be an issue with concentricity, or the shoulder. Maybe one of the shoulder, the cutting edge is a little far forward. It might be digging in. You might be, a lot of times, just fixing it is just a matter of changing your feeds and speeds on your lathe.
And I feel like what you're talking about is a very, very rare thing to come across, right? I feel like.
Yeah. I mean, we get calls about it. It happens.
But you're selling a lot of reamers, though.
We're
It's not
selling,
like,
yeah. I mean,
you you buy 10 reamers, you're not going to have 2 that,
No. It happens. It happens. Like I said, literally it could be perfect, and for whatever reason, it just wants to. And so there are a number of things. Oftentimes it has nothing to do with reamer. It just has to do with, usually you have to run that reamer a little harder than you think you do, right? You have to feed it a little faster, so that it is loaded. What happens sometimes is, if you're not giving it enough, what happens is it sort of digs in and snaps forward, because it starts to load, but there's not enough there to keep it. The reamer itself will torque a little bit as it's under load.
Yep.
And if you don't give it enough, it'll snap forward, and that's the real fine chatter that sometimes you can see. And the easy fix is you just increase your speed or feed, or reduce your speed and increase your feed, or you just play around with it, and probably 8 times out of 10 it goes away.
Yeah. So out of all the reamers out there, right, there's people to buy from. You can buy used ones, you can buy whatever. What makes it, like, when you pick it, let's say you were going to build a rifle, right? You're going to buy a reamer, right? Like, why is it important to get yourself a good reamer?
Well, like I just discussed, if you have a reamer that has some concentricity issues, or some other dimensional problems, or some problems with your relief angles, or any number of little tiny things, it's just going to give you problems, right?
Yeah.
It's going to drag. It's going to create galling inside the chamber, chatter problems. It may, if for example you've got it, if you have an off center, it's going to cut your throat, egg shaped. It's just all kinds of little problems that having a well-made reamer are just going to preclude from
So
happening
here's
to begin with.
kind of a weird question for you, and maybe you don't have the answer. That's fine. But like when you see like some factory rifles, right, and you're looking and you can see that like the throat's been cut off a little bit or something.
Mhm.
What causes that? I mean, if you got a piloted reamer, right? Like what like how what are you doing? Why does that happen?
Well, excuse me, it's not just the reamer. Okay, the bore itself on virtually all rifles has a little bit of a helical curve to it, or spiral, right? For a good barrel, it may be imperceptible. It maybe even not even there. I think in the 25 or so years that I've been buying barrels, they are twice as good today as they were back then. And back then, they were twice as good as they were 20 years before that. There's newer machinery now that are making them. But what you're seeing in that is more than likely is you have the reamer is going in somewhat at an angle to the bore. And so when it gets out there to the end, it's pushing to one side. It may be trying to get, that pilot may be trying to bring it over, but if it's it can't, it's going to try to follow the hole, but it's going to try to follow the average of that curve. And also, if the setup is bad, so that the reamer, one of the biggest things guys can use, like a floating reamer holder, one of the most important things, unless you have a perfect and like new and perfectly aligned lathe, your tailstock is not perfectly centered to the spindle bore. And unless you dial that barrel in perfectly to the spindle bore and your tailstock, and as you're running the quill, which drives that reamer in, as long that has to be running true. A lot of times that'll run off to the side a little bit. And what the floating reamer holder does is it allows that reamer to follow the bore more closely. And the closer you are getting it dialed in, the less problems you're going to have with it. Okay. Whereas if you have a barrel that's maybe a little lower quality, maybe more mass, everything's a price point. I'm not pointing any fingers at anybody. If you buy $100 barrel, you're buying a barrel that was made with $100 of effort, right? They can't, otherwise they wouldn't be in business, So, but with that, you're going to run into more of those problems, and you're going to see the kind of things that you're seeing or that you described.
Yeah. It's not something you see often, but you see like a cheap rifle once sometimes the guy pulls barrel off it or whatever, doesn't shoot good, and you see like, oh, it looks like it's off to one side or whatever.
Yeah, it happens.
And
it may be an ill-fitting pilot bushing, where the pilot bushing, the pilot was just a little undersized, so it didn't hold it to the center. It was allowed to
walk a little bit,
walk a little bit, or because of the way it was set up, it was able to just let itself glide along the one side a little bit and wallow out.
And my understanding, you probably know better than me, but my understanding is like some of those big manufacturers, they don't, if you go buy a rifle for $400, it's probably not $100 barrel that they're putting on it.
Yeah. Probably not. No.
You know what I mean? Like, to build the whole rifle and sell the rifle for 400.
Sure. Yeah. Right. Exactly. Right.
They're not.
Right. And a lot of those, it depends on what they're doing. you get a barrel, they're hammer forged. There's a lot of stresses in those barrels. Yeah, they'll last forever, because it's a good tough finish, good tough surface on the inside just from the forging. But because of the stresses, it's a kind of a curly cue inside there.
Hmm.
And as it heats up, it'll walk shots around a little bit.
Yeah, there's a lot of weird stuff. The
Yeah,
barrels are weird. There's just
yeah,
like
yeah.
some people you talk to, it's all science, and some people you talk to, it's 50% science and 50% voodoo.
Sure, sure.
But so let's say a guy wants a reamer, they want to buy a Manson reamer. Where how do you go about doing that? What's the right
Well,
the right
so
way to buy
one of the big benefits of our new ownership is we totally revamped our website. So while we don't have everything online right now, we've got, I don't know, 80-90% of it. You can literally, if you wake up tonight with, in a cold sweat saying you got to buy a reamer, you just log in and you can buy
it?
whatever you want. So if you wanted a custom reamer, something, it doesn't even have to be a Wildcat. Let's say you wanted a 6.5 PRC with a tighter neck and maybe a little shorter throat because you want to shoot a little lighter bullet in it or something. Okay. Um, we've got a little form on there you can fill out. You can kind of describe what you want, and a lot of those, some of those anyway, most of them maybe, will end up on my desk, and I'll draw up a print for you, and send you a little email describing what I did, and ask if there's any questions. Ask any questions. There'll be a little give and take in some cases, trying to nail down exactly what you want or get it exactly the way you wanted it. And then once you're happy with the design, you pay your money and we make you a reamer.
Boom, easy as
Yeah,
that.
as
Let's
easy as
see.
that.
I know one thing we talked about was a little bit was like some of the wildcatting, or like especially these ELR guys are doing all kinds of
Mhm.
weird stuff.
Sure.
Um, so let's say you want a wildcat, you tell them what you want, or whatever. They'll probably have something drawn up, I would guess, and they're going to send it to you, and then you're going to make it nice and send it back and be like, "Is this what you want?" And then maybe they want reamers for making their own dies too. How?
Yeah. So we make resizing reamers. We'll base them off of your chamber reamer. There's a little bit of black magic that goes into that, especially with ELR calibers. It's been an ongoing issue in the sense that with those big calibers, um, it's hard to resize that brass, and it's hard to determine how much smaller you need to make the resizing die than the chamber. And one of the things I've kind of recognized now after kind of, ELR is really blowing up in the last 2 years.
Oh yeah.
One of the things I've seen really over the last year or so, or at least come to realize, is in some cases we're getting, you know, we're designing a reamer. Somebody else is maybe designing the brass off of that reamer, or maybe we're designing the reamer off of the brass, and and maybe a third guy's making a die, whether it's with one of our reamers or in some other fashion. And the problem that sometimes happens is that because these three things are happening at the same time, and there's no chance to actually do real measurements on the brass itself, and oftentimes the reamers might be done before the brass. If let's say the brass comes in at the bottom of the tolerance, right? It's made correctly, but it's at the bottom of the brass maker tolerance.
Hmm.
Then you might have some problems with the resizing die, because now all of a sudden, um, it's not resizing it back down to what it needs to be, or maybe actually it might be the other problem. It's made
Yeah.
at the top of tolerance, and you can't size it down enough, right? What I if I had my way, I would try to get the brass ahead of time, the blot of brass you want to use, right? And measure that up so that I have a good idea what I'm working with. You can size the chamber correctly so that it's big enough, because really you're not going to squeeze that brass down much smaller than its original size
Right.
with a die. I mean, you might be able to get away with it, but you're going to need a big press to do it. With these big, 50 caliber Barrett size,
Yeah. Yeah. They're hard to do
Shytech
anyway.
size. Yeah, right. It's just, you've got a lot of, and you need a bigger die. You need a bigger press,
Mm-hmm.
right? The 7/8 inch dies, that you're just going to crack them trying to resize that. The big, well, I don't think you can even get the 50s in those, but Shytechs or some of the big Lapuas
It's all
based.
like, is
Yeah.
it 1.25 inch dies? I think 1.25 inch.
Yeah, 1.25 inch. I wouldn't be. I mean, it'd be for some of that stuff. I would. The bigger, the better.
Yeah.
If you can find a press to take it.
Yeah. So would it make sense to get like to try and, I don't know, I'm thinking, would it make sense to get like a sizing die and make your brass, like if you're just, gonna do that,
Like
right?
to make reform some
Right,
other
right.
brass into what you
Correct.
want. That would be a good way of doing it.
And then
Yes.
resize the brass to what it's gonna be, and then send you the brass, and then you can measure the brass and make a reamer off of the.
I think you're more likely. Everything is more likely to work out if you have something to start with. Okay. It not that it can't work out, but
Right, right.
there's with
Be easier for you guys.
it's easier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the easier it is, the better the results are generally, right? In my experience anyway, right? The less
Yeah.
you got to mess with it, and the less you got to guess.
Well,
Results will be.
when you're looking at the lead times we're looking at these days, let's say we make you a resizing die or resizing reamer. We don't make the dies. And I spec it out and I think, well, we'll size it about 5,000 at the base and, 6 or 7, the big caliber is 6 or 7 at the shoulder. Well, you get it, you shoot it a few times, you realize that's not enough, Ray. So then you got to send it back to me. I grind it down a little bit, send it back to you. You have to get a new die made. And we're all kind of working in the dark, but we're working with long lead times. Even if you send it back where it's not going to take us that long, you're still looking at probably 4 to 6 weeks for us to take your already existing reamer and make it a little smaller. And then you're probably looking at another, I don't know, however long your gunsmith takes to make you that new die.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're in next season to get your your super ELR rifle ready to go.
Yeah. Yeah, man, those guys, they got so much crazy stuff going on with the ELR stuff. I'm pretty
Yeah.
interested in it. We're going to be talking.
Well, I'm talking about all the problems. Of course, there's a lot of guys making everything work, right?
A lot of guys. Yeah.
We're making lots of lots of we're making 33 XCs like they're going out of style. We're making a variety of other things, Barretts and Hellfires and what's Steyrs, 460 Steyrs and so on. Guys are taking 50 spotter rounds and converting them into something else. So so there's a lot of things going on. A lot of guys, there are some pitfalls to watch out for, but I think for a guy who maybe wants to get into that sport, but maybe doesn't have deep, super deep pockets. It's not a light pocket sport to begin with.
No, it's not. That's what I was gonna say. You're like, well, somebody wants to do it cheap. I'm like, can you do it cheap though?
Well, do it in a semi-affordable way,
As budget friendly as you can.
budget friendly. Yeah, I mean, then look at existing things. So look at your Barretts, look at your XCs.
Yeah.
Lapua is probably outgunned now for even like the 1 mile events.
Yeah.
But
the 338, it's crazy. That was like
your Shytechs,
right?
because there's all that stuff's figured out, right? And we have reamers that work really well with a variety of bullets. The Warner flat lines, the cutting edge lasers. Burger bullets, the like for the King of 1 Mile, we used the Burger 300 grain OTMs,
Oh, sure.
and they worked awesome, And then for when I got to shoot King of 2 Mile this year, it was the first time I went to that.
Oh, nice. That's a good time. I did it in 17.
Oh, did you? Awesome. Yeah. We used the cutting edge lasers out of a 416 Barrett. So, and last year, Paul Phillips won. This year, we didn't as a team, we didn't do as well as we had wanted to. But it really wasn't the fault of the bullets or the ammo, or it was just a tough day,
Yeah.
So
That's how it goes down in Raton there. It's weird because, like, I don't know
yeah.
how much for you guys, but it was like every day, if I remember right, the wind would start at your back,
Mhm.
and then all your shots would land high because it's blowing up into the mountains.
Yeah.
And then if I remember right, it was like between 1 and 3 ish, a storm would blow over the mountains,
Yeah.
and then the wind would come at you.
Yeah.
And that was every day.
It's very common. Sometimes you can get into a rhythm like that where it's very common. We had wind coming out of the left, coming across the range, and the way the targets were set up, it was really difficult to tell what that was worth, because it was, you're shooting up into the air. Anybody, I guess, who's shot out in the out west, across the valleys and whatnot, they know, they understand. There's nothing between you and the target for you to look at. It's just open air. So
the bullets are going higher than that, so
yeah, right, and they're going up, right, exactly. They're going even farther. So if you have a little more experience with that, you've got a good feel for it. You're going to have an advantage.
Yeah. The crazy part is, like, you start looking at all the, like, magneto speeds and stuff that are hooked up, right? And like, and a guy shoots, and it's like, oh, that was like 10 feet per second faster. So just same hold, okay? Just
yeah,
yeah.
I'm not necessarily in that school. I'm not saying it's wrong. I think at a certain point, shooting, you don't have a lot of time when you're up there.
No, not at all.
And really, you've got to have your stuff dialed in before you get there. And not only that, but have your zeros, have a good knowledge of what's going to happen when you pull that trigger and what you need to do to correct for it. And I can only calculate so much on the fly, and so all of a sudden trying to calculate in, oh shit, that was 10 feet per second slower. I guess I need to hold a half a click higher, and I'd be I feel like that for me, that would make me not shoot as well as just laying up there and focusing on the fundamentals.
Sure. Yeah. I can see that too.
Yeah.
Everybody's got a different way, and it's
a different way. I'm certainly not.
Oh, no, I know.
Not denigrating anybody. I'm just myself. I feel like that it would be harder for me to perform well with too much info.
Yeah. No, that too, right? Keep it simple, right?
Keep
it simple, stupid. And then it's like I said, the easier you make it, right? Like,
right. Yeah.
It's always good. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about okay, I got a couple questions for you here that I'm going to hit you with, that we'll see what when guys want a chamber cut and they want it cut with the same reamer all the time, how important is that, do you think?
It's I thoroughly recommend that at 100%. How important it is. One of the old sayings is, if you get a new barrel, you buy a new lot of brass. Well, that's great. And maybe if you time it out right, it'll work out for you every time. But I like to run a big lot of brass. I might be running 1,000 pieces at a time, and I can run that through 2 or 3 or 4 barrels. And if I'm cutting my barrel with the same reamer, and my gunsmith is good, which they are, they're going to get the head space within a thou or so of each barrel. That brass, I can run that from one barrel to the next without a hitch. Before I started buying my own reamers, I ran into a situation that I couldn't figure out at the time, and this was a while ago. I had it was a 308. I had a barrel. Excuse me. When I when I put a new barrel on, the brass that I had, it had a few firings on it. When I resized it, it wouldn't fit. It literally, I mean, I couldn't close the bolt.
Hmm.
And so I went back to the guy, super nice guy. It wasn't his fault. What the issue was his reamer was a little tighter than the previous reamer. So in that case, I did switch to a new lot of brass. I didn't switch dies, same exact die, right?
Hmm.
But because the brass in the new barrel, the new tighter barrel, wasn't expanding quite as much, when I ran it through the die, it didn't spring back quite as much, and it ran fine in this new barrel. It was just an issue where all of that old brass that I had that I could still use if it would have fit, no longer fit in this new, somewhat tighter chamber.
Sure. What's the difference if you buy a reamer? Let's say you buy a Manson and then you buy a, PT&G or whatever, made by totally different people, totally different shops, totally different parts of the country.
Mhm.
How off are they getting, do you think? I mean,
Well,
differences.
in theory, they shouldn't be. They shouldn't be far off at all. If they're made to the same specs, okay, they shouldn't be. Now, in the real world, they might be, but if you bought a reamer from us in March and the same spec reamer from us in September, there might be a half thou difference in the diameter of those. Now, is that a big deal? Not really. But the in theory, if you're making it to a spec, it's made to that spec,
Mhm.
right? You might have maybe the neck length in the one you bought in March is 5 thousandths longer than the neck length of the one you bought in September, right? So does that have an effect on anything? Well, maybe. It might mean that you have to seat your bullet out 5 thousandths farther, even though it's the neck, it's not the throat. You're basically pushed the throat forward 5 thousandths before you started it because the neck was a little longer, right?
Mm.
Now, should that happen? No, and we take a lot of steps to try to. I mean, we're inspecting those reamers at multiple stages in the manufacturing process, right? In an attempt to keep them, the reamer we made 5 years ago, the same as the reamer we're making tomorrow.
Right.
One of the nice things that we've gotten new comparators, we've gotten new optical comparators, new nice ones, high end stuff in the
Sure.
shop since the ownership change. Those kinds of things help us keep things into a tighter and tighter tolerances, and that tighter tolerance is not only for your reamer, but it's also reamer to reamer over time.
Yeah.
There's
So how much of a
differences.
difference did you ever go back and like check the reamers and see how much of a difference was? But
I haven't, but because a lot of times the reamers are gone, right? We do have we've got gauges.
no, I mean your problem that you had with your brass. Did
Well,
you go
no, I
back and?
didn't. I wasn't able to because that was before I owned any reamers. I mean, that's back
Oh,
in the
okay.
'90s, right? So I would just send, I'd send a rifle off to a gunsmith and they'd chamber it for me, and I was fat and happy. I didn't know
Yeah.
any of this stuff, right?
Right. Right.
The less I knew, the happier I was, probably.
Yeah. It's just usually how it goes, right?
Yeah.
No, I'm just curious how much of a difference there would be for that to happen. Is it?
It wouldn't. It really, honestly, it wouldn't take much. It probably was less than a half a thou. And in fact, it wasn't necessarily that there was some problem with one of those reamers. It was that they were made to a different spec, right? So 308 reamers are all over the place,
Mhm.
right? Because they've been used at M16, they've been M14s and machine guns and Palmer rifles and et
Mhm.
cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Since that was like the caliber. I mean, even
Yeah,
look at 10 years ago.
yeah,
That was kind of starting to get out 10 years ago. But 15 years ago, I mean, everybody with a precision rifle, it was a 308. It was a 700 and 308, and
yes, exactly,
that was your precision rifle.
exactly. And so there were lots of different theories about whether the dimensions you wanted for the ideal chamber. For a semi-auto gun, you wanted a little looser chamber for feeding. They'd run better dirty, etc. For a bolt gun, a little tighter. For a competition gun, a little tighter still. And so depending on the reamer that might have been used in the first barrel versus the reamer that was used in the second barrel, it was just a different, more than likely it was at the base diameter. That's usually where you're going to run into trouble with your sticky extraction, which would be back here, back in this area, which I don't know if you can see that or not, but back near the 200 line or back near the rim of your brass, the lower third of your case, roughly, is where that case is sticking in your chamber. And if you set up your chamber too tight, what happens is yes, the brass will expand normally, and with virgin brass, it's all good, but you need a delta difference between your chamber and your resizing die. And if you don't have enough difference between them, your resizing die might squeeze that brass, but it just pops back out to where it was. And it just keeps growing a little bit, and by the third or fourth firing, it's sticking. Whereas if you have enough difference, what happens then is that die is able to overcome make sure I say this right. It's able to overcome and have the brass take a new size. So I think it's overcoming the elastic deformation or getting it down to plastic deformation, where when it comes out of the die, it's coming out at the die size, right? But the only way that's going to happen is if you have enough difference between your die and your chamber. In my case, like I said, I never changed dies. It was just that the brass coming out of that other chamber, I couldn't squeeze it down enough in my die to fit the new chamber. But new brass that was never allowed to expand that big, I could size that down enough where it functioned without any issues. And so there may have only been a half a thou difference between those two chambers.
Sure.
But it was enough.
Yeah. That's crazy.
Yeah.
All right, real quick, let's hit on some of the other stuff you guys sell.
Okay.
Just quick, just give us a little rundown. If you're looking for, you guys, just on the front page here, you guys do sell shotgun tooling and pilot bushing sets and receiver truing stuff. I mean, is there anything special or particular that's cool that you guys have?
There's a lot of awesome stuff. So it depends. A lot of that stuff depends on what. It's geared towards a gunsmith trying to make a living being a gunsmith. Maybe not necessarily for you and I who want to build our competition rifles, right? So some of this stuff was developed back, for instance, when there was not a lot of custom actions around. 20 years ago, there wasn't your trip over a custom action maker today, but back then, you had
700s.
Yeah, you had Kelbleys and Borden and a few that aren't even around anymore, right? And so truing up a 700, there was good business in that. So Dave developed a kit to where a gunsmith could true up a Remington 700, which they were cheap, right? You could get them, a gunsmith, they could get them inexpensively as a bare action and then, build somebody a rifle on that action. And so what they wanted to do is they wanted to make sure that the lugs were true to the bore. They wanted to make sure that the receiver face was true to the bore, make sure that it was threaded true. And so he had the Remington 700 accurizing kit. We had one, well, we still do, for the Winchester Model 70s. We've got some minor tooling for doing some work on like Mausers and so on. But mainly it was for that Remington 700 because everybody, back in the 90s, that's what everybody's rifle was built on, mostly. And for a gunsmith, trying to make a living, where they could do that maybe not as good as you could if you spent 5 hours setting up in a lathe, but they could get it darn close in, an hour and a half and be done. Probably less than that even. I've done it. Um, I've done it. It doesn't, I as a newbie doing it, being taught to do
Hmm.
it,
Hmm.
it is probably an hour and a half of learning how to use all the separate tools and stuff. But for a guy who does, was doing, maybe one or two of those a week, that's a big time saver for them,
Yeah.
right? Shotgun tooling, we sell a lot of that stuff. It's not. I'm not a big shotgun shooter, so it's kind of a thing that's cool to me that I don't know. I'm not as into it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, when people call and ask me about it, I kind of have to look up some things, to remember exactly what this thing does and that thing is for. But we do things like, we have, forcing cone reamers to make the forcing cone more gentle, which is more gentle with your shot, which results in a tighter patterns. We've got, choke reamers and choke tube installing, taps and so on, for barrels. And again, this is for gunsmiths who are doing customizing, shotguns for their customers. We've got shotgun bore reamers, believe it or not, that you run all the way down the bore. And while it sounds like, why would you rebore it? What you're really doing is you're putting choke back into a barrel. By making the barrel bigger, it's running all the way down the barrel, the shot column gently down this somewhat, we're only talking a few thousandths bore. And then when it gets to the end, it's, you're squeezing it back down to a full choke. So a gunsmith would use that in a barrel that's maybe a little too thin to install a choke tube in.
Sure.
So we have what some people might call like arsenal reamers, or we would call them a head spacing reamer, where these were bigger back in the days of the M1 Garands and M14s and 30 carbines, where you had a spring loaded op rod that was bearing on the bolt, and you would have a reamer that would bear against the bolt face and with a long stem that ran through the bore, and you would just turn it by hand until the bolt closed. And so you'd use those with a short chambered barrel. That used to be a much bigger thing than it is these days, but we still make them and we still sell a fair number of these things.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah, because that like a guy would buy if he didn't have a lathe and was gonna
exactly.
rebarrel his service rifle for shooting matches, he'd buy it short chambered and finish it at home.
Exactly. Yep. So
Oh,
we
that's
still
super
we
cool.
still
I've never
sell
heard of
them.
that. I've never heard of
Yeah.
that going
Yeah.
from, the back and pulling it. That's cool. That's a
Yeah. Yeah. So we still make things like that. We've got a variety of little doodads here and there for different things. We have like muzzle centering plugs. Again, these are time savers. Excuse me. If you they're not meant to replace or to be as accurate as you sitting out there in your garage or in your gun shop dialing in everything perfectly. But in cases where you don't need it perfect, you need it, within a thou or two, that works great. So the muzzle centering plug is just a thing that goes in your muzzle that protects it, and you can clamp your, you don't even take the barrel off the action. You clamp the action in the chuck, run your tailstock with a center into the muzzle centering plug, and they're sized in such a way that you can thread those barrels for a suppressor, and it's quick and dirty. And it's not really anything new. Guys have been doing it for years. They just decided to make up plugs to make it, so they didn't have to make their own anymore.
yeah, save you time there.
Yeah, yeah. So let's see what else we got. We're kind of running out of revolver tooling. Dave was a huge revolver nut, if you will. I've actually bought like 3 or 4 revolvers from him. I never had any before, but he's selling cheap, so I'm buying.
Yeah.
And and because of that, it was something he liked to do, so he made up a variety of different tools to work on them. And we still make a variety of tools to, like, let's say, rechamber your cylinders to from 357 mag to 357 maximum, or all kinds of different stuff, right? But we're getting to the point where some of those things just don't sell that much anymore, right? And so, every now and then we'll get a call from somebody saying, "Hey, you guys still make this thing?" And we say, "Yeah, we haven't made that like 10 years, because we haven't sold one in 10 years."
Mm-hmm.
And like some of the forcing cone reamers, and we had little setups which were similar to the head spacing reamers, because it's tough sometimes to take a barrel off of the frame. So you try to do it without doing that. And so it was a similar setup where you ran a stem down through the barrel, and then you'd pull that reamer in to recut the forcing cone. Or if you were putting a longer cylinder into a frame where you had to reface that barrel, we had some tooling that would do that. But most of that stuff is sold, and we just don't make enough of it to justify making it anymore.
Sure. Yeah, and that's kind of how it goes, right? I mean, revolvers are not as popular as they once were.
They're not, although I think once you played with one a little bit, there's something, I don't know, clock-like. They have the best feeling triggers out there, right? And just all that little clicking you can hear that's going on. It's just it's kind of therapeutic, actually.
Yeah, there's something about shooting, like, especially for me, like an old single action.
Yeah.
There's just something about it. It's so mechanical, and so
yes,
just like I don't know. I like it. I like it too.
Yeah.
I find that the more I get into like guns, I started out and I really wanted like ARs and 1911s and Glocks and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and then the longer I get into it, the more I want like a real, like, single action army, like a real one from back in the day, like an old, dude made it with like a hammer and a chisel. Ended up with like a, what I mean? Like, I don't know, that's what I find cool now. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Cut the barrel with like a wood lathe with like a block on the end and a piece of leather,
Yeah, right. How'd they do that? Yeah.
But hey, we're coming up on our hour here, so I got one real quick question, and then what's the most popular caliber you guys turn out, do you think?
Popular in terms of volume, or popular in terms of alteration of wildcatting? So
no, popular, like what's the hottest selling caliber?
Believe it or not, I think it's still a 22 long rifle.
Oh, sure.
Which I don't understand why, but we apparently sell tons of those little reamers, tons of them. I think a lot of them go through Brownells. So we they end up getting sold to Brownells, and then they sell them. We sell a lot of stuff. Brownells buys a lot of stuff that then they sell on their website from us.
Yeah. That's getting so popular now. The 20,
and that might be part of it. We've got a wide variety: standard, match reamers, small bore reamers for ELR, small bore or 22 ELR, that sort of thing. And but yes, I was a little surprised when
I wouldn't have guessed that.
I wouldn't have guessed it either.
I would think you could have put $50 on the table, and I'd have guessed 10 times. I'd have been wrong every time.
Well, 7PRC is selling like hotcakes too right now, but overall, in terms of numbers, it's still that 22 long rifle.
I wouldn't have guessed. I never would have guessed. Well, cool. Yeah. Hey, let's say somebody wants to get a hold of you. They got questions, or they want to buy a reamer, or they got whatever. What's where are we going? What are we doing?
MansonReamers.com.
Awesome.
Yeah.
There's a contact section or something, and you can click on that, and it'll get a hold of somebody.
We've got a contact section. We've got a build your reamer section. And then of course, most of our catalog items are listed on the site. You can order directly off the site. It's still a work in progress. Bear with us a little bit. It's still new. We've only had it up for a couple of months now.
Sure.
It's a new website. Yeah.
It's very nice, very user friendly.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they the new owners didn't go cheap on it. They made it nice, and so we'll be able to grow with it. We haven't got inventory integrated yet, so it's sometimes it may show in stock when it's not in stock. That's kind of a pet peeve. It would be for me, but bear with us. We're a small company. We're still working on it.
Yeah, yeah.
And things like that. Um, but by and large, if it's in the catalog, it's either in stock or we've got it already in process to be back in stock.
Awesome. Yeah, I haven't. I have, to be honest, I haven't used a Manson Reamer yet. But after talking to you, I think I'm gonna my next
Yeah,
couple
yeah, you
reamers. I'm
need
gonna get
some.
more.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't buy a ton of reamers, so
Yeah, no. Once you kind of get used to buying them and getting used to what your as you get more into building things specifically for yourself, or maybe trying to build it for a particular bullet, that sort of
Mhm.
thing. Um, it, it's it's really the only way you can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, cool. I really appreciate you coming on. I really appreciate it.
yeah,
It's
Kirk,
been
it's been a
fantastic. I
pleasure.
think it was
Yeah,
very informational, and maybe when we'll get a hold of you and have you on again after the new ownership's been around a little bit longer and the website's a little finished up, and we'll check back in.
awesome, awesome.
Awesome. Hey, thanks, Ray. I really appreciate it.
Yep.
Awesome. So with that, everybody, we're going to wrap this one up. But if you have any questions, comments, or concerns for me, it's kirk@precisionriflemedia.com, or you can go to precisionriflemedia.com, click on the contact us section, and that will shoot me an email, or through Facebook. Go to Facebook, look up Precision Rifle Media, send us a message. That's probably the quickest way to get a response. Um, so with that, if you got, like I said, questions, comments, concerns, you want to be a guest, or you know somebody that you want to be a guest, or you want somebody that for us to reach out to have on, feel free to get a hold of us there. We're always looking for. There's a lot of cool people doing cool stuff that we don't hear about, and we really appreciate your feedback. So with that, everybody, yeah, take care. Try to get to the range, and I'll talk to you next week. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye bye.